let us continue with what we were doing yesterday. We were doing Unit 4 and we were discussing some books on climate nonfiction. One of the defining characteristics of contemporary climate change nonfiction is its sense of urgency. The sense of urgency is the call for change in public policy, the call for informing the public. It is no longer a future threat that will happen maybe 10 years or 20 years from now. The threat is looming large upon us. It is happening now, and its effects are increasingly visible in the extreme weather events, the rising sea levels, and the displacement of communities. So, we already discussed a lot of these details in earlier lessons. The rising sea levels are creating havoc, creating floods. The flooded embankments have communities that are affected by this. The extreme weather events are tornadoes and storms, hurricanes, which are becoming more and more frequent and more fierce. The damage on lives and property is just not estimable in terms of human value. There are extreme weather events because of global warming. We have so many forest fires. There are landslides in mountain areas. So the climate crisis is there. It's here. It's upon us, and climate nonfiction is asking us to respond, to do something about it. And this element of urgency is there. Non-fiction writers address the urgency by presenting the scientific evidence of climate change in stark terms and by highlighting the need for immediate action. So it is clear science and clear facts related to science and geography and history that are shown through non-fiction books that call our attention and give grave warnings about the future. One important book that is about this controversy of people who side with the environmentalists and there's another side of the capitalists who do not support climate change ideas. They believe that it is just fiction and there's nothing that called climate change. The weather was always unpredictable. So this book, Merchants of Doubt, by Naomi Oreskes and Eric M. Conway, talks about all those things that are, this book talks about all those things that are related to climate change. This book discusses many global issues and many health issues related to global warming, and talks about those scientists who sided with the companies and tried to mislead the public. This book deals with the controversies created by a handful of scientists who denied the existence of climate change. So these were the naysayers who did not believe in climate change or in the statistics about the health damage caused by climate change. And this book unravels the facts of how a scientific community misled the public. This book also shows how climate nonfiction aims to educate the public about ideology and corporate lobbies that can skew these objectives. So the objective of climate non-climate non-fiction climate, the objective of climate non-fiction is to inform the public, to warn them about the state of climate and to help save the future. but these lobbies were powerful enough to mislead the public on these things, and they sort of upset or made askew the objectives of these well-meaning um, non-fiction books. Many non-fiction works on climate change adapt a tone of alarm to jolt readers out of complacency. Books like David Wallace Wells' The Uninhabitable Earth present the worst case scenarios for global warming, challenging readers to confront the full scale of the crisis. So, this book is important and has been a bestseller too, and it has fulfilled the objective of conveying the worst case scenarios of climate change and creating a sense of alarm in the readers. This book describes the potential consequences of inaction very vividly, such as mass starvation, resource wars, and ecological collapse. In this way, these authors aim to galvanize public support for bold climate policies. So, what might seem to be excessive sentimentality or exaggerated sense of things which might cause alarm is in fact not so, as we learn from numerous other non-fiction books. The alarm is well placed because climate change is here, and the world is threatened more and more by climate change and the things associated with it. So, the ideas such as mass starvation, resource wars, and ecological collapse are not fiction anymore. They are happening right now. There are places where there are struggles for water and food. There are places where there are famines and mass starvation, and in the event of famines or droughts, there are vast migrations, and the migration only leads to the extra population emptying out that landscape of its natural resources and then moving on. So it only creates a disturbance. So mass starvation and resource wars are not a fiction. And another thing is this idea of war. All these places where there are famines and where there is hunger, where people are displaced, many gangs and mafia come up. So they take advantage of the helplessness of these people, and they find a way to make money out of this. They make they create wars and they create strife, and it is a way of trying to make an income where life becomes very hard, and the weakest and the oldest get hit very hard. So the scenes that these non-fiction books describe are real, and if they cause alarm, it is rightly placed. And yet, there is contemporary non-fiction which also inspires hope by presenting potential solutions. Books like Bill Gates' How to Avoid a Climate Disaster offer practical roadmaps for reducing carbon emissions and transitioning to a sustainable future. These works emphasize that while the climate crisis is daunting, it is not insurmountable if governments, businesses, and individuals take decisive action. So, the element of hope emerges from the idea of collective action between the governments and individuals and businesses, and if they act in time, the hope is there that something can be done to revert or undo the damage of climate change. By balancing dire warnings with constructive solutions, contemporary non-fiction engages readers on both an emotional and intellectual level, encouraging them to become active participants in the fight against climate change. So they take all the material, study it, and try to understand the hard science facts, and they take the warnings also in their stride, and then they try to work out solutions which show that there's another picture related to climate change, that is a picture of hope and resolution as against all odds. Books like The End of Nature by Bill McKibben and This Changes Everything serve as manifestos for climate activism and urge readers to get involved in campaigns that demand political and economic transformation. McKibben, who founded the global climate movement 350.org, uses his writing to mobilize people around the world to fight for climate action, organizing protest, rallies, and divestment campaigns. So, we have already talked about McKibben, and he's a writer but also a climate change activist. And indigenous groups, for example, are frequently at the forefront of campaigns to protect land and water from extraction industries. So, one of the worst hit during climate change crisis are these communities in far-flung areas around the globe, indigenous communities where the government policy has not attended much to them. So they have land and water crisis. They have to save their land from encroachment from industries, or their water sources are depleted. So they have to come forward and fight. So these are the people who are frequently in the forefront trying to protect their land and fight for their rights. So some artists and writers also come from these indigenous groups, and they give voice to these actual concerns through their art and literature. Climate change non-fiction often highlights the role of marginalized communities in the fight for environmental justice. So, climate non-fiction focuses on the fight for environmental justice by marginalized communities. So, these marginalized communities can be indigenous groups, these can be women living on the periphery of of countries or places which are rural. So their fight is very important, and it is their fight that has come in the narratives of climate change non-fiction. They are women who have fought the effects of climate change on various fronts. So we have women from the farming communities who fight to save their crops or their land or their livelihood against rapid commercialization of crops and rapid consumerism. So they have, in India especially, they have started their own groups, and their their own businesses are there, and these are small industries where they use their skills in handicrafts, or in selling milk, or using their crops and their vegetables and fruit to make homemade pickles and spices. So this is an example how marginalized communities, especially of women, they fight back and try to become financially independent, and try to work against the effects of famine or drought or other issues of changing weather during climate change. So these groups are frequently at the forefront of campaigns to protect land and water from extraction industries, and non-fiction often talks about this struggle of these climate activists, because they are the ones who suffer the most. So in other words, uh, climate change writing, it sort of talks about those people who are suffering the effects the most, and talks about their struggles. Writers in this jar use their work to amplify the voices of these communities, showcasing their leadership in the global struggle for climate justice. So, what is important about this climate non-fiction is that it promotes the voices of these communities, and shows their leadership in the global struggle for climate justice. So, whether it is in the remote place like Kashmir, or places in the desert like Rajasthan, where there's extreme water shortage, there are NGOs which have come up, and they are headed by men and women who are the sufferers of this climate impact. Investigative journalism is very important in exposing climate issues. So it works for newspapers and magazines, and this investigative journalism, it is instrumental in exposing the causes and the consequences of climate change. Journalists like Elizabeth Colbert and David Wallace Wells use investigative techniques to uncover the hidden drivers of environmental degradation, from corporate pollution to government inaction. So there is a concern with climate justice, where one tries to go to the root of things, the root causes of environmental degradation, and does not spare the ones who are the cause of it, even if they are from the corporate world or they are from the government. So, in recent years, investigative reporting has revealed how fossil fuel companies have knowingly contributed to climate change while funding disinformation campaigns to downplay the severity of the crisis. So, we discussed this earlier book about doubt, and though it is a book, but it is based on something that is very relevant and that is very common. When the companies, for example, the coal companies or the oil companies, they feel that they are losing out to environmentalists, because the environmentalists are supported by the people who are on the peripheries, people who have been deprived of their land or their livelihood. Then the companies resort to underhand means. So they fund disinformation campaigns and downplay the severity of the crisis. For example, investigations into the companies like Exxon Mobil have shown that they were aware of the risks of climate change as early as the 1970s, but chose to suppress the information to protect their profits. So, this is one example of people in companies, multinational companies, or maybe they are industrialists who are afraid of losing their investments, so they'd rather hide the stark facts of climate change. So we find these examples again and again, and for example, one of them is when we look at the ads on media, on TV, in films about tobacco and pan masala. and we know that these things are harmful, but the companies downplay that. They downplay the harmful side because they want to sell their products, and they sell their products to very famous faces, very famous actors, so they may not lose out on their profits. So, for the sake of profit, they suppress information, leading to uh, public health issues and leading to more degradation and loss of lives. So, we already know that things like pan masala and tobacco are extremely um, unhealthy and are the causes of cancer, but the media and the advertisements funded by companies always show a macho image through them, that it is always good to smoke them. And the interesting or the ironic fact about this is that while people in the West have become more and more aware about the harmful effects of nicotine and tobacco, so their sales are going down in their own countries. So they seek out the developing nations and to sell their products, even if they harm the environment and they harm the people. So, this is the thing that we talked about in the earlier lesson also about eco spirituality, how profit is above everything. Profit becomes something that is above human values, and one does not feel in touch with either human beings or with nature. One just wants to get maximum profit. So, let's move on to the next slide. So, non-fiction works that expose these practices play a critical role in holding corporations and governments accountable for their role in climate crisis. Investigative journalism also helps to uncover the human stories behind climate change. By documenting the experience of climate refugees, farmers affected by drought, and communities displaced by rising seas, journalists bring the abstract concept of climate change to life. So, while the industrialists and the corporate houses would want this idea of climate change to be something fictional and abstract, investigative journalism brings it to life because it shows the real life stories of these sufferers, of the, for example, of the depleted Sundarbans forest. One gets a very rosy picture and a magical picture of these forests, but investigative journalism reveals the reality about climate change and rising sea levels and the loss of biodiversity in these mangroves. So, these stories personalize the issue, making it more relatable and urgent for readers. So, the element of urgency comes in, and the personal touch comes in, where readers can sense some familiarity and can get a feel of the suffering, and thus they feel encouraged to take action. The future of climate change writing. The evolving role of climate change writing is this, that it continues as the climate threats also continue, and because climate change is a very complicated uh, phenomena, it is not the same in any one country. So, writing is something that keeps evolving. As the global climate crisis intensifies, the demand for clear, urgent, and impactful writing on the subject has never been greater. So, in today's day and age, there is a need for impactful writing on this subject, and it was never so in the earlier periods. While this jar has traditionally focused on raising awareness, it is now evolving to encompass deeper, multifaceted explorations of solutions ethics and personal narratives. So, for primarily it was talking about the scientific facts of climate change and trying to bring them to public view. But as time is passing by and the climate threat grows stronger and stronger, the multifaceted explorations of solutions are there. There are various issues related to ethics that are discovered, and there are many personal narratives. And as said, the future of climate change writing is likely to expand further into new mediums, integrate intersectional perspectives, and continue to serve as a catalyst for political and social change. So, as our mediums, which are on the internet, um, our online sources are there, so climate change is bound to grow into them, and there will be a variety of platforms which will be addressing climate change. So, such studies and such research, such investigative journalism will continue to serve as a catalyst for political and social change. In this context, the genre of climate change nonfiction will grow in relevance. It will offer readers not just an understanding of the science behind global warming, but also frameworks for action, policy shifts, and individual transformation. So, as already said earlier, climate change phenomenon is a complex phenomena, and no one country has the same issues. And this is compounded by the political and ideological lobbies in that country. So, these books, these climate non-fiction books, they provide some kind of framework for action, policy shifts, and for individual transformation. Authors, they have to struggle to navigate the delicate balance between communicating the severity of the crisis and also providing hope and strategies for mitigation. So, there is a very fine line over here that the authors struggle to keep. It is conveying the severity of the crisis, talking about the grave dangers, about the climate threatened future, but also have to talk about the possibility of hope and resolutions. Also have to offer resolutions for various issues so that one may not be lost in the darkness of despair, and especially this is in relation to our younger generation which becomes extremely insecure when they are bombarded with news from all sides. So, the element of hope is very important, and in a calamity, leadership in fighting the calamity, leadership in finding resolutions to lessen the damage, these things are important, and these things are served by climate nonfiction. This book and by Dipesh Chakravarty, The Climate of History in a Planetary Age, is an important book. Let us discuss it in the next lesson. Thank you.